officials. The good news is that there was no vote today, so we are actually starting on time. The bad news is that the minister needs to leave at 5:15. The good news is that the minister can be quite economical in his remarks. But before I ask him to have his opening statement, I would take note that we are calling votes 1, 5, and 10. And at the end of the 2 hours, I will seek the committee's will with respect to the disposition of these votes. So with that, I'll call on Minister Blair to for his remarks and for an introduction of his officials. Minister Blair, you have 7 minutes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will try to be economic in my remarks. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present to you today the 2020-2021 main estimates and supplementary estimates B for the public safety portfolio. Fortunately, I have with me today, in order to provide explanation to the committee, these figures in greater detail and to answer questions that the members may have. I am very pleased today to be joined by Rob Stewart, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Michel Tessier, who is the Deputy Director of Canadian Security and Intelligence Services, President John Osowski of the Canada Border Services Agency, Senior Deputy Commissioner of the Correctional Services, Alain Toussignon, Commissioner Lucky, who is the Commissioner of the RCMP, and Jennifer Odes, the Chair of the Parole Board of Canada. Mr. Chair, before I get to the estimates, allow me to take a very brief moment to recognize the hard work, professionalism, and dedication to the employees across the 9 organizations of my portfolio. Their collective efforts, Mr. Chair, have helped protect our borders, our communities, our correction institutions, and our national security. And this year, in particular, amid the unprecedented COVID pandemic, they have continued to serve Canadians and I believe have done an exemplary job in their work to keep us safe. The estimates before you today reflect the breadth of that work. In my allotted time today, I hope to provide a broad overview of the estimates, highlighting some of the most substantial items for the organizations within my portfolio. Let me begin with the 2020-2021 main estimates. As members will note, the public safety portfolio as a whole is requesting a total of $9.7 billion for this fiscal year. Overall, the portfolio's funding has remained stable over the last few years, averaging 2.6% annual growth based on available funding authorities from 2014-15 to 2019-20. Spending increases for the portfolio in this fiscal year are also expected to be in line with those in previous years. To break things down by organization, Mr. Chair, Public Safety Canada is seeking a total of $725 million in these main estimates. You will note that there is a request for an increase in funds to protect people from unnecessary violence and work towards holding criminals to account. This includes an additional $25 million to take action against gun and gang violence, over $10 million to combat human trafficking and protect children from online sexual exploitation, and additional investments for the national cybersecurity strategy. Additionally, we are working towards providing additional support for the First Nations policing program, as well as infrastructure projects in Indigenous communities. I will now turn to this year's main estimates for other organizations in the public safety portfolio. CBSA is seeking a total of just over $2.2 billion in 2020-21, a net increase of $80 million or 3.8% over the previous year. The most substantial item affecting this change is funding levels for the CBSA is in addition to $75 million to implement and to maintain the agency's assessment and revenue management project. And once fully implemented, this project will modernize and streamline the presence of importing commercial goods, the process of importing commercial goods. The goal is to reduce the administrative burden for importers and other trade partners and to increase CBSA's efficiency and Government of Canada revenues. The CBSA's main estimates of 2021 also include increases of $17.3 million to enhance the operational response related to the fight against gun and gang violence. Also, you will recall that we have delivered on our commitment to improve air security and offer redress to those who were falsely flagged on the no-fly list by launching the Canadian Travel Number. The main estimates include $12.3 million to implement amendments to the Secure Air Travel Act and to introduce a framework for the Passenger Protection Program. I will now turn to the RCMP, which is seeking a total funding in the amount of $3.5 billion in the main estimates for 2020-21. In terms of increases, additional funds relate to contract policing services, support for the renewal of the RCMP's radio communication system infrastructure in Ontario, Quebec, and the National Capital Region, and over $20 million in funding to strengthen federal cybercrime enforcement. Moving to Correction Services Canada, the organization is requesting a total of $2.6 billion in its main estimates for 2020-21. The most substantial investment is being an additional $49.7 million to support the transformation of the federal correction system following the passage into law of Bill C-83. And as members know, we have eliminated administrative segregation. And the new system, called Structured Intervention Units, is designed to provide inmates the opportunity for more time out of their cell and meaningful human contact, as well as targeted interventions and programs. They also must receive daily health care visits by a registered health professional and comprehensive mental health assessments. And as we have recently been informed, there is much more work to do, though progress is being made. We will continue to work with groups to ensure adequate reporting and oversight and to measure the progress being made in achieving these important goals. On that note, Mr. Chair, I will now turn to the portfolio's supplementary estimates, which so far this year total $523.3 million. This represents a small percentage, only 5.4% of the $9.7 billion base funding requested in the main estimates. On a portfolio-wide basis, the total authorities sought in the supplementary estimates B, more specifically, would result in a net increase of $203.2 million. This represents a 1.9% increase over the total authorities provided to date, for a total of $10.7 billion. And if I may, I'll highlight a few key items in these estimates across the portfolio. Most notably, CSC is seeking $143.3 million in additional funding for support for the Correction Services of Canada. The supplementary estimates also include a transfer of $58.8 million from Public Safety Canada to the RCMP, and this is for First Nations community policing. This transfer covers the cost of the policing services provided by the RCMP under tripartite agreements between Public Safety Canada, the provinces and territories, and First Nations. The RCMP is also seeking $14.5 million in these estimates to implement and to maintain the National Cybercrime Solution. This will provide the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit with IAM IT functions it needs to receive, store, analyze, and share cybercrime data and establish a public reporting website. The CBSA is seeking an additional $6 million for measures to enhance the integrity of Canada's borders and asylum system, and is also seeking funds to crack down on fraudulent consultants. And more specifically, funding will support an IT system changes to ensure that CBSA's case management systems reflect the recent changes to Canada's immigration laws. Finally, Mr. Chair, I'll note that your documents also outline the 2021 main estimates and supplementary estimates B for CSIS, the Parole Board of Canada, the Office of the Correctional Investigator, the RCMP External Review Committee, and the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP. Additional funds for the Parole Board of Canada, in particular, will work towards addressing workload capacity for those involved with decisions pertaining to conditional release to ensure that we are keeping our communities safe. This has been a difficult year for Canadians, but regardless of the area in which they work, our employees have risen to the challenge. They work hard to keep us safe and secure. And Mr. Chair, I welcome the opportunity for me and my officials to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister Blair, and thank you for your cooperation in our always constrained time with you. With that, call on Ms. Stubbs for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Minister and officials, for being here. The estimates, as you mentioned, show a 25% funding increase for CSIS, and the 2021 departmental plan notes many priorities, but I don't see anything on foreign interference. So to the CSIS director, last week your spokesperson said that China's Communist Party uses spies to intimidate and threaten Chinese Canadians on Canadian soil, and that these illegal activities, quote, threaten Canada's sovereignty and the safety of Canadians. The Foreign Affairs Minister said the Public Safety Minister would be bringing additional measures forward. What are those measures?
Are you directing that to the minister or to the CSIS
To the
director?
CSIS director as the first try, since we asked the minister this question in the House last week.
Thank you for the question. What I would highlight is that CSIS is mandated by its authorities as defined in the CSIS Act. And the threats that CSIS can investigate are well defined in the Act, and primarily in terms of foreign influence activities and espionage. Foreign influence activities are defined as having to be deceptive, clandestine, or a threat to Canada's national interests. And in that vein, I can assure the committee that foreign interference and espionage remain very much a primary threat and a priority investigation for CSIS.
Thank you. So can you let Canadians know, have any individuals in Canada come forward to the authorities you've outlined about intimidation or harassment since those reports were published last week?
Unfortunately, I can't get into any specific operational details, I'm sure you'll appreciate. But what I will say is we work very closely with communities in Canada and with our law enforcement partners to investigate any harassment or threats to these communities. It is important for us to ensure that Canadians feel safe, that they don't feel that they are being threatened or that their families are being threatened. And in that vein, it is important for us to maintain those contacts, work with our law enforcement partners and any other stakeholders in order to investigate any threats to Canadians.
Thank you. So I do trust that you likely coordinate with the FBI, and of course there were reports last week that a month ago the U.S. Charged 8 individuals for these exact activities. So I just wonder, do you know, or can you let us know if any of those 8 have any activities in Canada, and how many foreign agents have been charged in Canada or any charges pending?
I unfortunately can't get into those operational details in terms of the FBI arrest. It would be more, I cannot either discuss individual investigations in order to talk about any charges that would be better responded to by my law enforcement colleague.
Okay, so one more time to the minister, then, just following up on the question that we did ask in question period, which you didn't answer specifically. Can you, minister, tell us exactly what measures you will be implementing to confront and combat the issues of foreign intimidation and harassment in Canada?
Yeah, thank you very much for the important question. And you'll recall when I last appeared before SECU committee, I actually raised the issue of the hostile activities of state actors and spoke very specifically about this issue with respect to the Chinese government in particular. I can tell you, and although I'm sure you appreciate, Mr. appropriate to talk about any matter of ongoing investigation or to speak of elements of national security. But I can tell you,
Sure.
just
So
as
the foreign minister said you would bring in additional measures to combat what clearly we now know, and I think probably most Canadians are shocked to learn about, that really is happening in Canada. So what I'm trying to do is get a specific answer from you. What are those additional measures you will bring in?
Yeah, well, let's just give
Or
an
was the
example.
foreign minister not? Maybe it wasn't accurate what the foreign minister is saying. Maybe you aren't bringing in additional measures, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to answer.
The foreign minister and I work very closely. I'll attempt to answer your question, and Ms. Stubbs, I'll just simply, you've asked a number of questions previously, for example, about Operation Fox Hunt, which actually began in 2014, and the operational posture in response to that in 2014 was, quite frankly, when we came into government, determined to be quite inadequate, and as a consequence, we have very significantly changed the approach of our law enforcement officials and CSIS in taking a far more proactive approach. We do a great deal of outreach to individuals affected, and there are things that are being done and will continue to be done, and we're continuing to enhance our response to that. But with great respect, it's not appropriate, in my opinion, to discuss those matters of national security, intelligence gathering, or law enforcement in this forum.
Well, I would suggest that it is more than appropriate for you to tell Canadians exactly what it is that you are going to implement to protect their safety and sovereignty, which thank goodness most Canadians are all learning about now. But on another note, CSIS reports that Alireza Onghai runs a company which has been, quote, assisting the government of Iran in the clandestine wiring of monies into Canada. Are you, Minister, or anyone in your department or the agencies under your of any politically exposed persons who may be involved with Onghai?
Again, thank you, Ms. Stubbs, for the question. As you note, our officials have done, I think, a very exemplary job in identifying and gathering the evidence in order to deal effectively with this threat. And I'm unable to discuss particular elements of that intelligence or that investigation in this forum. But we always take steps to make sure that if there are vulnerabilities identified, that they're dealt with appropriately.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Mr. Giacono, 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair.
Merci de votre présence.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your remarks, Minister. We are all fully aware of the working conditions that the staff members from security and intelligence agencies. Regarding the 2020-2021 budget, I'd like to talk about the recurring flood. It is a major concern for Quebecers as well as inhabitants of Montreal region and Laval. Could you tell us what are the measures taken by the government to face and anticipate flood? Floods have caused a lot of damages in the past, and it can only worsen in the future because of climate change.
This is a very important question, and the impact of flooding and the recovery from those floods has significantly impacted Canadians right across the country, and of course, as we both know, in the province of Quebec. That's why the Prime Minister mandated myself and my portfolio to take action to create a more resilient and sustainable approach to floods in Canada. A very important key component of this approach involves the creation of an interdisciplinary task force on flood assurance and relocation, which we announced earlier last week. The task force will be given the option to look at options to protect homeowners who are at high risk of flooding and who do not have adequate insurance protection, to examine the viability of low-cost national flood insurance program. The task force is made up of representatives of the federal government, the provinces and territories, First Nations, but we've also gone out into the private sector, and for example, the insurance industry is represented at that discussion. We have been we will be sharing information and working closely together to engage various departments, including First Nations off reserve, in providing a more responsive response. I've also worked with the infrastructure minister with respect to providing funding to various jurisdictions with respect to flood mitigation and flood prevention initiatives. And so it's a very comprehensive approach. But we believe that the work of this task force, Angelo, in providing greater resiliency and protection for the victims of floods, but also a national insurance plan, are going to be key to helping us provide a much more effective response. I could also speak, and I won't, it takes some time, but you know as well, the government through the DFAA program provides funding through the provinces in order to assist with flood response. But what we believe a dollar invested in prevention is a far more effective dollar than just simply investing in recovery. We'll always be there for people who are victimized by floods, but we are doing some very important work to mitigate those problems before they happen.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, de votre réponse.
Thank you, Minister. Your answer is very reassuring. Another issue in my writing, the conditions of living conditions of inmate and working conditions of the staff in jails. Could you let us know about the cost of the measures that were undertaken during the first wave and now during the second wave?
A very important question, because of the nearly 14,000 people who are serving sentence in our correction institutions, we have a duty of care to protect them during the challenges and the unique challenges which occur in our correction institutions as a result of COVID. During the first wave, Correction Services Canada, I think, did an extraordinary job of working with the Public Health Agency of Canada, provincial health authorities, and regional health authorities in making sure that their institutions were safe. And so when infections are brought from the community into the institution, they've taken some really extraordinary steps, I believe, in ensuring that there's been health and safety audits, infection control audits that have been done. They provided PPE equipment to inmates and to corrections workers in the institutions. There's been a number of very effective measures, and as a consequence, after the first wave, they really were able to wrestle that pandemic in the institutions well under control, and we were very fortunate to go a number of months. Unfortunately, however, with the recent surge within the community, we're starting to see that reflected in your riding, in particular in the Drummond institution. We now have 18 inmates now are suffering from infection, and a number of correction officers who, of course, live in the community. We also are monitoring very carefully the Federal Training Institution, which I know of which you are very familiar. At the current time, as of today, there are 95 inmates in the federal population right across the country who are infected with COVID, and they are receiving treatment within the institutions, and we are taking a very significant steps. If there is more time, I would invite the Deputy Director of Correction Services Canada to talk about some of their measures. But I think the model that Correction Services Canada implemented is a model that would serve well to all of the provincial governments and other jurisdictions to look at how effective safety measures can be implemented to keep inmates safe.
You have about 30 seconds, Mr. Iacono.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. C'est très...
Thank you, Minister. This is all very reassuring. I'm happy that this time we will be better prepared. We will be better prepared for the situation. Thank you very much for everything.
Simard, bienvenue au comité.
Mr. Simard, welcome to the committee. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the CBSA. I don't know if you remember. During the first wave, there were many issues with snowbirds. You know, those people who do not want to live through the winter in Quebec and they go to the United States. Those people were repatriated. It was a little bit messy. Municipalities struggled to find locations for them. And here's the situation now. Some people managed to circumvent the rules targeting non-essential travels. They send their recreational vehicle by road while they fly to the United States. I'm not sure if the minister is aware of this problem. I wanted to know if any measures have been implemented to raise awareness about how traveling to the United States might be dangerous from a COVID perspective.
Samar, for a very important and very timely question, because exactly as you have explained, last spring when COVID first became prevalent in North America, there were quite a number of Canadians, particularly Canadians from Quebec, who were down on spring break in the United States and in other places in the world. And they have, under the Constitution, a right of return. We will always let Canadians return. But unfortunately, that did create a vulnerability. The current situation is, first of all, Global Affairs Canada is strongly advising all Canadians not to travel out of country, to remain in Canada. But of course, we don't have the authority to prevent people from making the choice to go to other jurisdictions. The rules that you talk about being circumvented are not actually Canada's rules. They are the United States rules. The United States, although they closed the land border reciprocally with us last March, as a result of discussions and arrangements that we made to restrict non-essential travel, they did not place similar restrictions that Canada has put in place to prevent people flying into their country. In Canada, the rules are quite strict that non-essential travel is restricted in both land and in air mode. But in the United States, the Americans have allowed people to continue to fly into the US. And as a consequence, some Canadians are in fact making the decision to fly into the US to vacation or to spend their winter in Florida or Arizona or other places. And you know, they're not breaking any of our laws, but let me assure you, upon their return to Canada, first of all, under the Constitution, they will have a right to re-enter Canada, but they will be ordered into quarantine by whatever rules may exist at the time of their return. And right now, that's a 14-day quarantine. They will be ordered and required to quarantine upon their return. CBSA has to allow Canadians to re-enter Canada, but they will be subject to the Public Health Agency of Canada's rules under the Quarantine Act and be subject to quarantine. We will continue to discourage it because, frankly, any Canadian traveling to another jurisdiction, I would strongly urge them not to do that. But should they choose to do that, make sure they have good health insurance and make sure that they will have access to adequate health care.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Earlier, you said that CBSA is asking an additional $6 million budget. You talked about tackling the issue of fraudulent consultants. In my writing, some people come and tell us that some dubious people sometimes is approaching them. So I wanted to know if the CBSA has a register with those fraudulent consultants.
Important and relevant question, and I would invite President Osowski to provide you with some insights of the work that CBSA is doing and the fund and how the funding that we are providing them will be utilized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I'm happy to report that we will be receiving $10 million over the next 5 years and an additional $2.1 million ongoing to increase our criminal investigation capacity. We currently have about 50 consultant-related investigations opening each year. This new funding will allow us to do an additional 13 cases or so a year. I would say the cases vary broadly in terms of the levels of complexity and effort that's required to bring them to some resolution. Some can take years. I can say of the 376 cases that we have open right now, 288 are still at the investigative stages, and 88 are at the point where charges have been laid and the matter is before the courts. We appreciate these resources. It's an important issue for us to ensure the integrity of our immigration system.
Monsieur Simeon, 30 seconds.
30 seconds? I have some time? Yes, 30 seconds. Okay. So I'd like to know, is there a barometer that establishes what is a fraudulent consultant? Sometimes we see people who will have a recourse to support for their process with citizenship and immigration, and we're talking about enormous sums. So what is there a barometer on the amounts that can be charged to a person and that make it so that at that time it's a fraud?
Again, asked an important question. He does have a second round, so possibly he could get that answer in the second round. 6 minutes is up. Merci, Mr. S'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome Minister Blair to our committee for the main estimates. As you know, our committee is undertaking a study of systemic racism in policing in Canada, and we've got a lot of evidence before us. But I wanted to draw your attention to the report of retired Supreme Court Justice Bastarash last week, entitled "Broken Dreams and Broken Lives." It's a very appalling account of what he referred to as a toxic culture within the RCMP that encourages, or at least tolerates, misogynistic, homophobic, and racist attitudes. And he went so far as to say that he didn't believe that the RCMP could change the culture from the inside. In fact, he said true change can only take hold if an independent external pressure is brought to bear. And he said fixing the RCMP and addressing the negative culture that has taken root will take an immense effort and require the goodwill of the leaders and members, but most of them are invested in the status quo and will not likely to make the necessary changes to eradicate this toxic culture. That's quite an indictment, I would suggest, Minister. And what I would like you to tell us is whether you are committed to eradicating this so-called toxic culture, and are you prepared to provide the external pressure that was required, according to Justice Bastarash, to see that happens?
Well, Jack, let me begin by giving you the shortest possible answer, and the answer is yes. I am absolutely committed to that. I will tell you that Justice's report, which I have read in its entirety, documented the devastating effects that sexual harassment and sexual violence has had on women in the RCMP, and like I believe, like all Canadians, and I believe like the vast majority of RCMP officers, we are appalled by the lived experience of the women whose concerns were documented in this report, and they are completely unacceptable to us. Justice Bastarash, I think, very helpfully has provided us with a number of very important recommendations, and I'll give the RCMP Commissioner an opportunity to speak to the very important work she's doing in response to that. But Jack, if I may if I may answer your last question, you'll recall that in the throne speech, which you very kindly supported when was voted on, we have very clearly stated our commitment to bring about reform of the RCMP, and in particular to deal with issues of governance, oversight, and accountability. The government is prepared and is working towards fulfilling that responsibility, and so the work should be done both internal to the RCMP and external by the government.
Let me get to accountability. The Civilian Review and Complaints Commission of the RCMP commissioner, what chairperson was before this committee in July, and she said that the commission needs to be better resource in order to conduct systemic reviews. Yet we see actually a decrease in the funding for the CCRC in the main estimates. And we have a outstanding complaints for 3 years or more that have not been dealt with, and 175 reports sitting on the commissioner's desk since March. What is that in terms of accountability if we don't have the additional resources that's necessary? Is the minister prepared to agree that that system is not working and needs to be fixed and better resourced?
Yeah, thank you very much. Another very important question, Jack. And let me simply remind you that last year or earlier this year, we introduced Bill C3, that actually had attached to it $24 million additional resources for the CRCC, and as well as introducing legislation. That legislation also requires, in my opinion, very clear and mandatory timelines for the speedy resolution. And I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that the important function of oversight and accountability for the RCMP and as well for the CBSA needs to be strong in legislation and properly funded to ensure that the independent reviewers that we task with this important work have the resources and the tools and the authorities they need to do the important job. I think public trust is absolutely contingent upon both that legislation and those investments, and we'll be reintroducing strong legislation in that regard. I can also inform you that I know that the CRCC chair and the RCMP commissioner have been working together to significantly improve those timelines and to address the backlogs that existed. And I'm prepared as well in the interim until we get this legislation passed to take additional measures that as required to ensure that those timelines are in fact met and that the resources are available to the CRCC to do their important work.
This is the main estimates, though, Mr. Minister Blair. This is the main estimates, and there's no money, no additional money to allow the CCRC to actually do the job that she's asked, that commission is asked to do. And so, you know, it's all very well to have high-minded words in what we're going to do, but this is the estimates that the commission has to work with, and they're not able to do their job and do these systemic reviews that are required or meet those timelines. And I think that's the reality that I'm calling out here today. I don't know, Mr. Chair.
You're down to 10 seconds.
Well, I don't think I can have time for a preamble, let alone a question.
Well, I know that's just not even the throat clearing time for you, Mr. Harris.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll have another round, I'm sure.
Okay, you will indeed. That does bring to the end our first round. Our second round is 5 minutes each, except for the NDP and the block. We're starting with Mr. Motts, Madame Kara, Mr. Simard, Mr. Harris, Mr. Van Popta, and Madame Danoff. So 5 minutes, Mr. Motts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Blair and your officials for being here today. On May 1st of this year, you and your government, through Northern Council, brought in a gun ban that has now close to 2,000 previously legal firearms that are now prohibited. Upon examining the estimates, Minister, I'm having trouble finding the costs associated with this particular buyback program. Can you tell us the total cost of the buyback program?
Thank you for an important question. As we indicated that we will be introducing legislation that does a number of things, including provides us with legislative framework for
Minister, I don't, you've explained exactly what this is supposed to do, which we know is a failure. I'm asking specifically for numbers. Do you have the numbers of the total cost of what this buyback program will cost Canadians?
And thank you, Glenn. That actually will be provided when we bring forward the legislation that is required to facilitate the how we deal with those firearms which have been prohibited. And by the way, Glenn, let me also, you characterize as a failure, and I couldn't disagree with you more.
You're not answering my question. Sorry, Minister, I'm talking about costs, and you're not answering my question on costs. So I'm going to move on to my next question. Well, if you're going to put a budget together, obviously you're going to have some idea of what these things are. Can you provide us an estimate of what the administration costs for the RCMP and your public safety department will be to run this program? Any idea whatsoever?
Yeah, thank you very much, Glenn. Actually, some really good ideas on that. And it isn't my intention to have law enforcement administer that program. That would be a very expensive, and in my opinion, a very inefficient way to do it. We're looking at other measures, and so that we might very responsibly fulfill our responsibilities to those firearm owners who actually acquired these weapons legally that have now been made prohibited.
Yes,
no. In the most cost-effective and efficient way.
Sorry, Minister,
to produce real good public value.
We know the other plans. We know the other plans that you have already put out. You put out 2 tenders, not one, but 2 tenders, both of which have come back with 0 bids to date. You want somebody else to design your confiscation program for you, and it doesn't appear anybody wants to touch this particular billion-dollar boondoggle. How much do you estimate it'll cost of taxpayer dollars to now pay back the confiscated firearms owners who are the firearms you're going to actually confiscate from legal firearm owners?
Colleagues, I just want to point out that it works a lot better when we don't interrupt each other. So, Minister Blair, would you respond to Mr. Motz's question?
I'm just looking for numbers, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I think it is incumbent upon me to identify that almost everything Mr. Mott said was filled with so many inaccuracies, and I didn't want to interrupt him because that would be rude. But I would not adopt any of the characterization that he presented. I will, however, advise him that I believe that the weapons that are now prohibited, those that were legally acquired by Canadians, I want to make sure that those Canadians are treated fairly. And so we are looking at bringing forward legislation and a budget to deal fairly with those Canadians, but at the same time.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate those comments, and I know legislation is coming forward. I've heard you, so it's obvious you don't know what the cost will be. You've told Canadians it's going to be $250 million, and you first pushed this on the Canadian public, and now we know that it'll probably be 10 times more than that. Now, I'm also curious to know how much you estimate it'll cost to buy back the guns from criminals lined up to turn in their legal firearms. But when I look, that must be the budget line I see with all the zeros on it, as we know that none of those criminals are going to be lining up to turn in their who are the real threat to public safety. They're not going to be lining up to turn in any of their illegally obtained firearms. A gun ban, as you know, will not apply to criminals. Minister, you maintained in a statement that the AR-15 is a firearm designed to kill as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time, and that it is not a hunting or sporting rifle, and that is no place in society. So if that's the case, can you explain why public servants and the government of Yukon are buying this same firearm to manage human-wildlife conflict management? To me, it sounds like a legitimate use of a firearm that has appropriate licensing, safety, and storage requirements, contrary to the flawed rationale you guys use to justify your order in council. Any thoughts on that?
You have less than 30 seconds to answer Mr. Motz's question.
And hopefully it'll be uninterrupted. Mr. Chair, we have prohibited weapons that have been used far too often in mass murders of innocent people and police officers. That we believe there's absolutely no place for such firearms in civil society. We do, however, and it's been necessary. I recall vividly after 3 RCMP officers were murdered in Moncton by an individual using a firearm, which we've now prohibited. And the response of the government of the day was to buy similar firearms for the police so that they would balance the firefight. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, we have taken action to actually remove those firearms from civil society that will keep our communities safer and keep our police officers safer.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Motz. Madame Demoff, 5 minutes, please.
I thought it was me.
Well, I was just got a note saying that it was that you and Pam had switched. Can we?
Go ahead, Kamal, because I think
Thanks,
Gary
Pam.
switched
Okay.
with me. So Kamal, go ahead.
Okay,
Please
thanks,
keep the
Pam.
clerk in the loop here, please. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, and to all our witnesses for being here. Minister, last week, Peel Regional Police joined forces with services across the Greater Toronto Area successfully completed Project Siphon in a 14-month-long investigation resulting in numerous arrests and seizures of firearms, drugs, and property. I believe it was over 800 charges that were laid, 88 people that were arrested. And I think many of the arrests were related to organized crime, firearm offenses, shootings, drug and human trafficking. And I truly commend the Peel Regional Police for their outstanding work. Minister, you know this, in the Greater Toronto Area, in Brampton, unfortunately, we've heard and seen the tragic effects of gun violence too often. We know there is no simple solution. We need a comprehensive approach, including a combination of measures such as investing in our youth, investing in our borders. The mains and sub minister, you're seeking appropriations of $85 million. Do you have any update on programs to combat gun violence and smuggling in Canada, and how we're helping municipalities like Brampton dismantle street gangs and keep our communities safe?
Thank you very much, Kamel. That's I think this is the question of our time, certainly in Brampton with gun violence and in the city of Toronto. First of all, I take the opportunity to remind the committee that this government actually provided $327 million over 5 years to the provinces and territories to fund municipal police services across Canada. $65 million was provided to the province of Ontario to fund police services such as the Peel Regional Police Service in their gun and gang investigations. And those monies clearly are being well spent and well invested by the Peel Regional Police Service. And I join you in commending them for their dedication and their hard work and the success of their investigation. But we also know, Kamel, that just investing in law enforcement isn't enough. We've worked with the police community and we are strengthening gun control laws to create new offenses and new penalties to eliminate the ways in which criminals get guns. Many of them are smuggled across the border, some are stolen, and others are criminally diverted. And we'll be bringing forward legislation that will strongly deter all of those activities. But most importantly, and as you highlighted in the second part of your question, we have to make investments in kids and in communities to change the social conditions that give rise to so many of these crimes of violence and frankly create a demand for guns. I think the police are doing some extraordinary work as a CBSA to reduce the supply of guns, and we're going to help them do even better. But we also know we have to reduce the demand for guns in those communities, and that's why we have promised and we'll be bringing forward in the very near future initiatives to provide additional funding directly to communities, through the municipalities, to community organizations who work with kids, to get them involved in after-school programs, job training programs, changing the social conditions in our communities that give rise to that violence. We believe it's important to invest in policing, but also to invest in community. And I believe in the long term, it's those investments in our kids and in our communities will have the greatest impact on public safety. It's a worthy investment and an investment we're prepared to make.
Thank you, Minister. Just briefly, because I know I may not have that much time, if you can talk about the security infrastructure program. In the past, we've been told that the security infrastructure program has been oversubscribed. Can you please update us on what the government has done to improve this program and make it more accessible for communities like mine in Brampton to apply?
Yes, ma'am. And I think it's one of the most important programs and resources we make available to religious organizations and other community organizations to provide them with funding to take steps to keep themselves more secure. Our government has quadrupled. We've increased the funding 400% over the past 2 years to support those organizations. But Kamel, let me tell you, it is still oversubscribed. And so what we're also doing is we're broadening the flexibility of that program in application and in how those resources are spent by community organizations that resource it. And I think through your advocacy and others, we'll continue to work hard. If more resources are needed, I think we get incredibly good value for those investments in supporting organizations to keep themselves safe. And there's a number of ways we can do that, and we're making sure that they have the flexibility to utilize those resources to the best effect. I think it's an extraordinarily important program. We have very substantially increased the funding. I believe there's more that we can and must do.
Thank
You have
you.
a little less than 30 seconds.
I probably won't get a answer in that. Maybe I'll use that in the next round or.
Okay, or you could allocate it to somebody else. Yes. Thank you.
Gary, did you want it?
It's all right. We'll go on to Monsieur Simard, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, rapidement, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais revenir. Je m'entends en traduction. J'aimerais revenir.
I would like to come back on the issue of fraudulent consultants. Previously, I was asking you whether it would be possible to establish scales for tariffs and measures that are put in place. Sometimes some consultants set tariffs that are very high, which is not necessary and results in increasing costs for people who want to reunite with their family and who have student visa as well, or want student visa. I wonder whether you would have a register of these tariffs and of these measures that are in place. Monsieur Simard, si vous me permettez, je vais vous dire que la loi sur la fraude n'a pas un montant précis qui y est apposé. Mais je vais inviter le président Osowski de vous donner plus de détails sur la question. Nous avons un chevauchement ici avec la traduction.
Oh, sorry, to whom?
Mr. Osowski.
Osowski. Okay, and if you could respond, we'll see whether we're still getting the same thing we were getting with Minister Blair.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I would start off by saying that the regulation of the industry would fall under the responsibility of the Ministry of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. We're responsible for the criminal investigation side of things. So we would typically look at offenses such as misrepresentation, forgery under the criminal code, fraud, mischief, that type of thing. That's the type of work that we're responsible for. But in terms of the Minister of Immigration, he's actually, I believe it's in his mandate letter to look at bringing forward legislation to regulate the industry.
You have a few seconds left, Mr. Simard.
Yes, I do understand that it is the responsibility of the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. So they set the scale on what can represent a fraud. Is that what I should understand?
Well, that would be defined in the courts under the criminal code in terms of fraud and what evidence is in play in any particular situation.
Merci, Monsieur Simard. Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody understands that there's overrepresentation in our prisons of Indigenous and Black Canadians. But we've recently had a report published in the Globe and Mail revealing that in addition to that, there are biased and discriminatory risk assessments being done that essentially systemic discrimination towards Indigenous and Black Canadians, resulting in more ending up in maximum security, less access to programs and training, and serving a longer period of their sentence incarcerated rather than in the community. Minister Blair, does that disturb you? And can you tell the committee what is going to be done about this to end this form of systemic discrimination in our prisons?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jack. And yes, of course, it's concerning. I think it's unacceptable that Black, Indigenous, and all racialized people face very significant disparate outcomes within the criminal justice system writ large. And it's one of the reasons we have identified our commitment to address systemic racism broadly in the criminal justice system. I've had a number of conversations with CSC, and I'll allow them to speak further about some of the work they're doing. But let me also take the opportunity to commend the important work being done by this committee to identify areas of concern and risk assessment. And as we have also indicated, we will be introducing legislation and making investments to take strong action to address systemic inequities in all phases of the criminal justice system, from diversion to sentencing, from rehabilitation to records. And those CSE risk assessments to determine what institution an individual will serve their sentence in will be part of that examination.
Mr. Blair, when the correctional investigator appeared before the committee earlier this month, he told us that the CSC has the highest staff to inmate ratio in the world, with 19,000 employees for just 12,500 inmates, 1.5 staff for every inmate. But he also told us that the inmates don't have access to much more than pencil and paper when dealing with programming. They don't have access to tablets or computers, supervised use of the internet. They don't have practical tools and vocational training. Why is it that the department in this departmental plan is actually increasing the 353 full-time equivalents staffing instead of reallocating resources to provide the kind of programming that's actually necessary to help prisoners be rehabilitated and be able to live better lives in the community?
Again, that's a very important question, but Mr. Harris is way past his time. So I'm going to ask you to try and work in an answer in some other opportunity. With that, Mr. Van Popta, 5 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us again, and thank you to all the other witnesses.
Is Mr. Van Popta as faint to me as others? Okay,
Can't hear
try
it,
it
Chair.
again.
All right, I'll try again.
Oh,
I'll
there we
speak a
are.
little louder.
Okay,
How's
yes,
that?
yes,
Okay.
excellent. Okay.
So thank you, witnesses, all for being here. Minister, I wanted to talk about funding and human resources allocations to fighting illegal drugs. You will be aware that there's a fentanyl crisis in Canada right now, and particularly in my home province of British Columbia, and that fentanyl is coming from China. Now, police experts have been quoted as saying that they simply do not have the human resources to be able to tackle this, nor do they have the aggressive policing strategies needed to mount a complicated transnational organized crime to tackle this problem. So my question to you, Minister, is whether adequate resources are being allocated to this very serious problem for all of Canada.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me first acknowledge the significance and the criticality of dealing effectively with the interdiction of the supply of illicit drugs coming into Canada. To that end, we have invested $33 million to help equip our border agents with the tools to intercept fentanyl and other dangerous substances. We've prohibited the unregistered importation of pill presses, for example. We've allowed officers on reasonable grounds to open international mail weighing 30 grams or less. We've also made fairly significant investments in the RCMP, and I would invite the RCMP commissioner to talk to you about some of their work in the interdiction, in the international interdiction of transnational importation of illicit drugs, the precursor chemicals used in their manufacture. And I wonder if the commissioner might have something to add.
Commissioner
Right,
Lucky?
you can be sure I've got a couple of other questions too, but please go ahead.
You're still on mute. It's not good to have a commissioner on mute.
Okay,
There we
now
go.
it's working.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Obviously, we've been working hard at tackling organized crime. It's a priority of ours. Those investigations are extremely complex, but they are a priority. We work side by side with our partners such as CSIS and CBSA and our international partners, especially within the Five Eyes. We like to target those groups. We work overseas with our many liaison officers to exchange that information. And when those individuals are working in Canada and working overseas and doing the transnational organized crime, that's when we bring in specialized resources to tackle those crimes.
Mr. Van Popta, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. But so far, it's not been very effective. Over 100 people a month in British Columbia die of opioid overdose. It's way more people than are dying of COVID-19. So we have two two epidemics happening here. So far, it's just getting worse over the last 4 years.
And it's a very important question you raise, because supply interdiction of these illicit drugs is an important part of the work of our law enforcement agencies, and we work internationally on transnational uh, trafficking of these drugs. But we've also been working in just as importantly in communities, restoring the harm reduction pillar to our national drug strategy, investing in a number of initiatives that are taking place in communities to deal with the health aspects and the tragedy of those deaths. And I think that work requires balance. The national drug strategy has a number of important measures. It begins with effective supply interdiction measures, and we've been investing in those things. It also requires demand reduction, harm reduction, and rehabilitative and treatment services. And so we are trying to ensure that we provide a wide and spectrum and comprehensive response to this opioid crisis. Mr. President, and I don't disagree with you. Supply interdiction is an important element of that, but it's not the only element of that. And I think in years past, and I was actually involved in these investigations for many years myself, a great deal of emphasis always goes on law enforcement, but we have to look at the medical consequences, treatment, and support for people who have addictions to help keep them alive.
Of course. Sadly, it just seems to be getting worse over the last number of years, despite the efforts. I want to turn to another issue that is important to all of Canadians, and particularly in my home province of British Columbia, and that is money laundering. And Minister, money had been promised as recently as 18 months ago for more funding to fight this in British Columbia, but it sadly that just has not happened. So what do you intend is going to happen? Are enough resources being allocated to fighting that significant problem?
Great question, and I'm really this is a very important question, and I need an opportunity to answer it. Over the last 2 years, we have invested $300 million in the RCMP, FinTrack in the CRA. We've announced the establishment of the Public Safety Action Coordination and Enforcement Team, CBSA Center of Expertise, as well as we've made amendments to the Criminal Code. And this month, and this is very important, the RCMP was further approved for $98 million towards the creation of the new integrated money laundering investigative teams to replace the integrated proceeds of crime teams that the previous Conservative government eliminated in 2013. This is going to add additional officers in Alberta, Ontario, BC, and Quebec to do the important work of dealing with organized crime, money laundering activities in this country. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, this is an issue that we take very seriously, and we've come through with those investments we promised.
Mr. Van Popke, I think you should send Minister Blair a thank you note for that time extension. With that, Madame Danilov, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, the Canadian Gun Lobby recently did a cartoon of me and Minister Freeland making fun of the fact that I've highlighted that women are killed or threatened by partners with firearms. As you know, the vast majority, I believe it's over 70% of gun deaths in Canada are actually by suicide. And in Ontario, there was just recently a report on the number of suicide deaths by firearm. They were largely white males in rural Canada. Recently, I did a Facebook Live with Dr. Alan Drummond, who I know you know. He's the former president of the emergency physicians here in Canada. One of the things that he has highlighted and you've committed to, Minister, is to red flag laws. And Dr. Drummond highlighted that as a physician, he has a duty to report things like infectious diseases, individuals who are unsafe to drive, and that it only makes sense to add the right to have, add people who have, it's not a right in Canada, so I want to correct myself, but it makes sense for physicians to report people who may be at a risk to themselves or to others. And I'm just wondering, Minister, if you quickly, if you are planning on bringing in legislation that will deal with red flag laws.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Damoff. And first of all, if I may, let me acknowledge, I think some of the comments made by people who work for the gun industry and the gun lobby have been reprehensible, misogynist, deeply offensive, and I think offensive to the vast majority of Canadians. I wish some of the leaders of our other political party would find the courage to denounce those activities, but allow me the opportunity to denounce it. With respect to red flag laws, yes, ma'am, we are working very hard to, as quickly as possible, introduce legislation that will introduce red flag laws. Red flag laws, I think, can have a very significant impact in three very important areas. First of all, to deal with domestic and intimate partner violence. And as you've said, the overwhelming majority of domestic and intimate partner violence are women, 8 out of 10. And that when a firearm is present, that dangerous situation can become deadly. And we want to empower women and those who support women in these dangerous circumstances to remove the danger of a firearm present in those homes. We also recognize and strongly influenced and advised by Dr. Drummond and the medical community's work that 75% of all homicide deaths in this country are in fact self-inflicted. You know, and the gun lobby never wants to talk about that, but it's a reality in Canada today. And so we are going to empower physicians, family, and concerned citizens to be able to take action to remove firearms in those dangerous situations. And finally, when people are online and they're spouting hate and advocating violence against women, religious minorities, or ethnic minorities, or any vulnerable population in this country, you know, that we have hate crime laws, which can be, in my experience, very challenging to enforce. But we need to have the tools to disarm those individuals before they can go out and engage in crimes of mass violence that have created so much tragedy in this country. And so, yes, it's a priority for our government. We'll be bringing forward effective red flag legislation to ensure that Canadians have the tools they need to keep themselves safe.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your comments as well. My next question, my colleague, Mr. Harris, brought up the recent report that came out on sexual harassment in the RCMP. And I have to say that the only other report that I read was similar to that was on Edmonton Max, where they described the culture as like the 1950s movie, The Blob, and that it didn't matter how good the people were, they got consumed by this toxic culture. Minister, and a similar question from Commissioner Lucky, but will we be able to have an independent external review of the RCMP? Because this has been going on for 30 years. And, you know, especially on today, I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to end my intro here. I'll give you time to respond quickly, Minister, but I'd like to get a response, perhaps from Commissioner Lucky first and then from you.
You're still on mute. Still on mute.
I
There we are.
actually had a bit of microphone problem, so I'm wondering if you could just repeat part of your question, the last part.
Just committing to an independent external review of the RCMP. It's been 30 years without being able to find a solution for this.
What I can say, you know, these unspeakable acts. I read that report and I've read it again, and that's exactly the reason why I applied for the job. That's why I was selected for the job, and that's why I'm so committed to making that change in the RCMP.
But with all respect, Commissioner, the report has said that the change can't come from an internal review.
But in my case, I'm not speaking about an internal review. I'm speaking about actions internally to change the culture, to change the governance, to change the stewardship, to change how we deal with these things internally. We're introducing an independent Center for Harassment Resolution, which has a big prevention part to it. It's the first of its kind. We're looking at, you know, it's an independent where people feel trusted that they can come forward. We're looking at, in the time that I've been in the chair, we've achieved gender parity on the senior executive. When I used to come into Ottawa and see the table, it was all white males. And now I'm looking at the table, it's 50% female across Canada. Out of the 15 RCMP commanding officers, almost 50% are female. You would never see that. And these are actual visual changes.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that extremely important question there. I see Ms. Damoff is in the next round of questions, so maybe you'll want to come back to that. With that, we're into the third round of questions, and Mr. Kirk, you lead off with 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's good to have you here at Committee, Minister. With regards to RCMP funding, Minister, recently in my riding, there has been blazing criminal acts not seen in many, many decades. A bank robbery in a community of 250, police impersonators pulling over people and robbing them, and more crimes that I can outline here today. Rural crime continues to grow, and people in rural areas are being left to fend for themselves too often. We know that the RCMP have large areas to cover, especially in rural and remote areas, and there is consistent staffing challenges. Your government's response to M167 in the last parliament was embarrassing, and rural and remote Canadians deserve to know when the issues of rural crime will be taken seriously. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. Let me assure you that crime that occurs anywhere in this country is taken very seriously. And I would invite the Commissioner of the RCMP to speak to how the RCMP in the jurisdictions where they are the police of jurisdiction respond.
Thank you, Minister. We have rural crime programs in each and every one of our provinces. Our big successes recently have come through our crime reduction enforcement support teams that we've stood up in many of the provinces in Western Canada. These crime reduction enforcement teams are dedicated to rural crime. They blitz areas where rural crime is occurring. They do warrant roundups. They do all kinds of activities to target the people, the prolific offenders that are committing the crimes in those areas. And so we look at that part of the population, the smaller part of the population causing the most or committing the most crimes. What we're doing is with those teams, it's intelligence led, it's evidence led, and they target those areas. So in order to reduce those crimes, they've had great success.
Thank you very much, and Minister, I would just emphasize, and I appreciate the work that is being done by RCMP officers on the ground each and every day. But it's unfortunate. Again, I mentioned M167, of incredibly disappointing response from the government on rural crime. So, Minister, this is truly a failure of the Liberal government. But I would sorry, 157. My apologies. So, Minister, you've said your department is primarily focused on COVID. Yet we've learned in the last number of weeks that there's been 5 million people enter this country with an exemption. And we know a number of those people who have entered Canada have done so by specific ministerial exemptions. It's unclear, however, what conditions are placed on these individuals and if they undergo any tests. So my question to you is what conditions have you approved for those who are able to enter the country without quarantine, and are those conditions universal with your other colleagues who are authorized by the Order in Council to grant those exemptions?
You have about a minute and a half.
Thank you very much for the important question. Let me speak about two instances where I actually issued national interest exemptions. One was in the aftermath of the tragic death of a Canadian armed forces.
So, with respect, Minister, I greatly appreciate but I'm asking what conditions were placed. So not examples, but what conditions?
Well, the Canadian, there were a number of family members of the Canadian Armed Forces members.
Excuse me, Minister.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. Kirk. I am getting some real noise in the background here, and I just don't know where that's coming from. I look at the screen, and everybody seems to be on mute. Yeah, I'm assuming it's in the chamber or in the room itself. But let's continue because I don't hear it now, but there was new noise there. So let me just restart. You had about a minute and a half that you had to answer the question. With that, Minister, restart your answer to the question. I apologize for the interruption.
The one case was in the province of Nova Scotia, and it was for the soldier's family to be able to attend her funeral. The second case was at the request of the Alberta government, where there was a sexual assault victim who was required to attend in person at a trial and had to travel in from the United States in order to do so, or otherwise the province was going to lose jurisdiction and her attacker would be freed. And so in those cases, we worked very closely with Public Health Agency of Canada, with the provincial public health authority and the regional health authority to ensure that appropriate measures were put in place for all the people in Nova Scotia attending the funeral and for the victim of that terrible crime to attend the trial and testify, that we did provide support and accommodation to ensure that they were able to isolate appropriately, and that they were also equipped with a number of personal protection equipment and other support measures so that they could attend those two events, which in my opinion were absolutely necessary and right.
Yeah,
that we do that.
Thank
and
you.
that we worked with the public health authorities to make sure that that could be done safely and at no time with the health and safety of all Canadians compromised by those efforts.
Thank you very much, Minister.
15 seconds.
Sure. I find it interesting, and I appreciate the examples that were given, but it seems clear that there were no universal conditions placed, and conspicuously absent in your answers was regarding tests, specifically rapid tests. So I think that speaks volumes about not necessarily the merits of those specific exemptions. I don't think anybody is questioning those, but the larger picture government response to some of these exemptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Ananzanguri, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you, Minister. Good to see you as always. I want to really pick up from where Mr. Harris probably left off, and acknowledge that your commitments to address the issues of racism, systemic racism within the different areas of the criminal justice system, including the RCMP. Minister, one of the challenges I think we've faced is a lack of clarity from the RCMP and the Commissioner in terms of where we're going with this. While legislative changes, I think, are an important element of this, the absence of a concrete plan by the RCMP, I think, just leaves quite a bit of unanswered questions. So I'm just wondering if we can get a commitment from Commissioner Lucky as well as you to have a constructive plan to address the systemic issues of racism and discrimination within the RCMP, and the timeline by which a plan can be tabled to this committee, and a timeline to implement the said plan.
Thank you for a very important question, Gary. Certainly, you and I have spoken about a number of the things the government can do in legislation, regulation, and in funding, but I wanted to give the Commissioner an opportunity to articulate many of the things that she has been doing in order to respond to this concern.
Thank you for that question.
And Commissioner Lucky, if I may, just before you start, I think what's important is a comprehensive plan, and if you can maybe give us a timeline, as opposed to because we do know publicly some of the things that you've undertaken, but I think a comprehensive plan that the committee could study and a roadmap to address systemic issues.
No, thank you for that question. The plan started when I got into the chair with Vision 150, but in 2020, of course, the context changed. So we added an additional 17 initiatives to advance equity, accountability, and trust in the RCMP. And it's grounded in ongoing stakeholder engagement, and it supports and builds on the Vision 150. We have brought in forums to exchange the information for diversity and inclusion with national and divisional committees. We have created guides. We have a mental health advisory group. We have a new equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy that includes cultural awareness and humility training that is mandatory, as well as we're in the process of co-developing anti-racism training. And the reason why we're co-developing is so that we can have the people most impacted by this have a say in how the training is rolled out and what is included in the training. We're doing collection and analysis of race-based data to address systemic racism and discrimination in collaboration with our partners. We're supporting, of course, the rollout of body-worn cameras. We're strengthening timelines in the public complaint process through MOU with CRCC.
So Commissioner Lucky, if I may just interrupt, because time is limited. I know there's a lot of interest in this, and while I recognize, I think those are important initial steps, I'm still a little lost as to how all of this is going to lead towards a comprehensive plan that will address the issues of systemic racism within the RCMP. I think we're at a stage right now where the 17 points that you've outlined are what I'm going to suggest are first steps. What are we going to do about the culture, about the lack of accountability, and a whole host of issues that I think are live today. And I'm just wondering if you're able to, in a position to commit today to table a comprehensive plan to address systemic racism within the RCMP within, say, the next 4 to 6 weeks.
All the initiatives are on our outside website for anybody to see. There's measurables.
With great respect, Commissioner, I think it's inadequate, and I respectfully ask you to look at this much deeper and come back with a plan. Because I think since our initial conversation back in the summer, we have had this discussion a number of times, and I think at almost 6 months in, I don't think we have a roadmap or a plan. So can we expect a comprehensive plan from you, apart from what's on the website, to address systemic racism within the next several weeks?
Very briefly, please.
Gary, if I may respond to that, I'm aware that the SECU committee is actually doing its own study, and I think the work of parliamentarians in this regard is really important and will inform the government and the RCMP in appropriate steps forward. We have also indicated in the throne speech our intention to bring about significant reform in every element of the criminal justice system. I know the Attorney General and I have had a number of conversations in this regard. And the work is important, but it must be comprehensive. I'm not entirely sure that the timelines you prescribe are appropriate for an undertaking of this importance. But I want to assure you and this committee of our absolute and unwavering commitment to do that work and to be informed by the important work that the SECU committee is doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
Monsieur Simard,
Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have a question for Mrs. Tessier. This summer, in the Globe and Mail, there was an article stating that there were concerns with regards to stealing intellectual property in university university exchange students, especially Chinese students. Is it only China that has this concern? Are we only targeting China? Thank you for the question. We are still concerned with regards to all hostile states that might steal, essentially, intellectual property here in Canada. We've highlighted that there are several countries. I can't talk about the detail of all countries, but China is one of these countries, and there are others. For operational reasons, we can't discuss this in detail. We did highlight, and we continue to highlight with the community the importance of protecting ourselves, and we have to work in partnership with universities, sensitive sectors, so that they're able to protect themselves. And this is what we're concentrating on right now. Thank you. Okay, so do you have the right to look at visas requested by foreign researchers or students? For some categories, yes. We give our advice with regards to the threat level that is represented by a person to our colleagues at the Border Services Agency and Immigration. So they make the final determination. Our role is to do an assessment of those who are requesting. How can you look at what represents a theft of intellectual property, and on the other side, what is common in a university setting, the sharing of research discoveries in basic sciences? So who determines? Do you have support from people from universities? We recognize the importance of being able to work in a sharing environment, especially in university. So what we do, and I was saying earlier, we work with universities in order to provide information to give them advice so they're able to protect themselves. We think it's very important that it be a partnership, that they understand the issues, but we're fully aware that it's important for them to continue to do their job, but they have to be aware of the risks and where they can be vulnerable.
Thank you, Chair. And the minister can answer the question on staffing as well as respond to this additional point. More disturbing in Mr. Zinger's appearance before the committee earlier this month was his statement that he regards the communications, the Correctional Services of Canada as having an attitude or long track record of dismissing the Ombudsman's recommendations and being unresponsive. And he said not only to his, but other commissions and recommendations that have come forward, and despite the agreement of the government on these things. So my question is as follows. Do you feel that you have sufficient authority or actual control over the actions taken by the Correctional Services of Canada in response to these recommendations and response to your agreement to them?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. And I think these are very important questions. I will tell you that I work very closely with Dr. Zinger, and I very sincerely value his observations and his advice in these regards. I also had the opportunity to work previously in another capacity with his predecessor, Dr. Saper, and I think their work is invaluable, and I very much support it. I think it's also important that CSE responds appropriately to these recommendations, and it is my responsibility, Jack, as the minister responsible, to ensure that Correction Services Canada pays appropriate attention and responds in an appropriate way to the recommendations and observations made by Dr. Zinger. I think that I personally believe that in my brief tenure in this office, the relationship between the Correction Service, the Corrections Investigator, Correction Services Canada, and the Public Safety Ministry has been very, very positive and productive, and I believe that we'll continue to work collaboratively together. If I may also respond to your earlier question with respect to staffing issues, the additional monies that are requested are staffing requirements for the implementation of Bill C-83, the introduction and the full build out of the SIUs across the country. It does require, it is a resource intensive activity in ensuring that those inmates receive the supports and the services and the times in various functions that there are people there to make sure that happens, and we're making those additional investments because that is part of our legal obligation to ensure that those SIUs are properly implemented. And if I may quickly reference, the work of Dr. Dube, and I think he identifies for us there's a lot more to do.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. With that, Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Sorry, it'll be Miss Stubbs. I know you're. I know you're disappointed.
Miss Stubbs will be you.
I know you're disappointed, Chair.
One of us is disappointed. Yes. Yeah.
I'm inconsolable, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, the minister's very sad.
We're gonna cope. We're gonna cope. Okay. Shannon.
Thank you, Chair. So just following up on my last question and linked to CSIS's work to the minister, are you aware that Ali Reza Ong Hai is identified by CSIS as under investigation for participating in clandestine foreign influence operations for the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Actually, I'm Shannon, and by the way, my inconsolability wasn't related to you, but only missing an opportunity to talk to Glenn. I wanted to assure you of that. Yes, I have an awareness, and I'm regularly briefed by CSIS and the RCMP on the important work that they do. But as I'm sure you will understand, I am not prepared to discuss that advice or the information that we receive.
Okay, so I had asked the question about politically exposed persons because I guess then related to that, do you know that an Ali Reza Ong Hai donated $240 to Liberal MP Majid Jowri's Riding Association on December 3rd, 2019. And I'm also just looking at a picture of Ong Hai with that MP in Parliament's center block. So I guess I'd just say you'd forgive me for asking if this is related then to your government's refusal to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist entity in defiance of the will of Parliament that, of course, you yourself voted for on June 2018.
Yeah, two very separate issues, and I appreciate you highlighting them so I can have the opportunity to explain that the determination on listing is based on a very careful. It's not a political act. It is an act that is informed by our intelligence services and by the RCMP, who conduct very comprehensive investigations, provide advice based on the law and the evidence to make a determination on whether or not people are listed. And there is absolutely no correlation whatsoever between that totally independent and important activity by CSIS, the RCMP, working frankly with me and the government in determination.
So what are you doing? What are you doing to ensure the will of Parliament's going to happen then, which is to list that entity as a terrorist organization?
Well, certainly we have asked that the CSIS and the RCMP would continue to do their very important work of gathering the evidence and making assessments based
so
on
it's
the
been 2 years,
law.
So we'll follow up again, I guess, to see if you've done
based on
your
the
role
law.
there. But I need to move on, Minister.
But the law hasn't changed with respect to the listing of terrorist organizations. And we're following the law.
Okay, again,
Right.
it's better we don't talk over each
Right,
other.
but Parliament is given direction, which would be your job to ensure it's executed. But sorry, thanks, Chair. So Mohammed Hirsi was arrested in 2011 and sentenced in 2014 for 10 years for trying to join a terrorist group. He's deemed a high risk to reoffend due to extremist ideologies and violent behavior, and he's clearly a threat to others. Under the Conditional Release Act, offenders are not supposed to be given statutory release when they're a threat to others. So why is he going to be back on the streets before his sentence is up, to the Minister?
Again, the parole board can and does impose conditions on any offender who is available for statutory release, and which it did, in fact, in this case. Those determinations are made independently by the parole board of Canada, and they impose conditions, again, independent of any political consideration. And all offenders in those circumstances must report regularly to the Correction Services of Canada parole officer. I would invite our parole board chair to add any comment that she believes is appropriate in responding to your concern.
She could follow up later on that, Minister. I just need to hold you accountable because you do have an option. You can ensure the legislation is applied correctly. The parole board has deemed Mr. Hirsi a high risk to reoffend, so he clearly shouldn't be eligible for statutory release. And in 2019, 5 additional people convicted of terrorism-related offenses were released under statutory release provisions. The parole board deemed 4 of those individuals are still radicalized and remained a high risk. So A, why is the parole board's guidance not being followed in these cases? And B, again, in terms of what you are going to do, you should know in February, the UK passed emergency legislation to ensure those committed of terrorist offenses serve full sentences and are not granted early statutory release. That was a result of 2 separate incidences where there were releases who then carried out a terrorist attack. So A, as the public safety minister, it's literally your job to ensure that legislation and policies are being enforced right now. And you do also have the option to take legislative action to fix this problem.
Very briefly, please.
Yeah, very briefly. And I simply remind the member that in fact, under our government, we've taken far more action and far more effective action in dealing with these individuals. And in fact, we brought 8 of these offenders to court and to justice. And I compare that with the dismal record of 0 under the previous government. We've also committed to supporting prosecution authorities, bringing forward and appointing a director of terrorism prosecution.
Well, I've just given you 6 examples of clear threats to public safety in Canada right now. So with all due respect, after half a decade in power, you should actually fix the problem instead of blaming previous
You left us with so many problems. It's a lot of work.
Exchange to closing.
Chair, I think maybe Minister Blair would want me back now.
You are starting to look pretty good, Mr. Mott. Colleagues, we have the minister for another 15 minutes. Madame Demoff has 5 minutes to finish off this round. And if you could indicate to the clerk whether you want a truncated 4th round, my proposal would be something like 2 minutes per, and maybe a minute for the block and the NDP. So 2-2, 1-1, 2-2, and that would bring us to the end in our votes. So with that, Madame Demoff, and if you could indicate to the clerk immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, when you were here last time, I asked you about the report on Colton Boushie. This weekend, I'm interviewing his family as part of a panel that I'm doing. I wasn't aware when I asked you about the report last time until I read an article in November 2020, November 10th, that there are actually 149 interim reports awaiting a response. 14, one is more than 4 years, 14, 3 to 4 years, 44 are 2 to 3 years, 49 are 1 to 2 years, and 41 files are for less than a year. As we've been looking at systemic racism in policing, I think probably one of the most important things we've heard is accountability and consequences when there's things that go wrong. Commissioner, these numbers are just unacceptable. So my first question is, it's 3.5 weeks till the end of fall. Will the Bushy family get the report released publicly before then? And secondly, what are you doing to deal with this backlog?
So after you asked me that question about Bushy report, I went back to my team and really pushed the envelope. Lots of information that was given to us from the CRCC in January. And I have been told I will have that report on my desk on December 4th. And I will work through the weekend to get through it. It will go back to CRCC and it'll be up to them to release it. We don't release it. But I'm committed. Get the report on December 4th. I'm going to work through the weekend on it and make sure that I'm prepared to release it to the CRCC shortly after.
And what about the other 149 reports that are outstanding?
Those aren't public interest investigations like the Colton Bushy. Colton Bushy was specific. They're much more lengthier in time. But we have since I became commissioner, you're right. We need to get better. Canadians deserve better when we talk about timelines for whether it is ATIP or CRCC reports. So we've created an MOU with the CRCC with service standards. We need to get rid of the backlog, and we're committed to getting rid of the backlog in 2021 and not having a backlog. We're hiring more people to do those reviews and to provide those responses. And so absolute commitment on the part of my team that we will eliminate the backlog and be more timely in our responses within the service standards that we're setting out.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, I have a question for you. We had Dr. Zinger here a few weeks ago, and one of the things he said in his report was that he's just tired of recommending things to CSC because they just don't listen. And I'm just wondering, have you met with Dr. Zinger, and what are you doing to ensure that some of these recommendations are being implemented by CSC? One of them particularly had to do with employment training in the institution.
Thank you for the question. I have not met Mr. Zinger as yet, owing largely, I think, to the COVID pandemic and the occupation doing other things, but the minister has, and I have spoken with the minister about Dr. Zinger and his report, and I have talked to the commissioner of the Correctional Service of Canada about the report and about the agenda. And of course, the department and the staff of the department have worked with the correctional services to respond and to ensure that those responses embed the views of the minister. We are actively working to try to pursue the agenda that Dr. Zinger has laid out for correctional services, again, taking into account some of the barriers that are imposed by the COVID pandemic.
Okay,
Very briefly.
I think I have a minute left, right?
Yes,
or just
I think you're
under.
right.
I do recommend you meet with him. I just spoke with him not too long ago. There's a lot of really good stuff happening there. To the person for corrections, do we have results of the FASD pilot project that was being done at the Regional Psychiatric Center in Saskatoon? And if you could send them to us, that would be great.
Thank you. I don't have those results with me currently, but we will make sure to forward the results. I will do a follow-up and make sure that you receive the information that you're looking for.
Okay, that would be great. And also whether it's going to, if the results were good, if it can be expanded to all of the institutions, because I know that's a challenge that all of our correctional facilities face. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. All I have is Mr. Motts for 2 minutes. If the Liberals could indicate who they wish to have for the next 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And my question is again directed at Minister Blair. Thank you. I'll be gentle with you this time, Bill. The total dollar amount of your portfolio, both statutorily and voted upon, will be 10.7 billion, up 2.2 billion from 2015. But as you know, sir, since 2015, Canada has faced a growing opioid crisis, a growing number of shootings, higher urban crime rate, higher rural crime rate, higher violent crime rate, growing court backlogs, fewer victims' rights, questions around the strength of the correctional systems, questions around the parole system, questions on police oversight, issues of foreign interference and foreign influence. There have been deep concerns raised by nearly every department under your watch, and more money, yet worse results. Clearly, your plan is failing. And Minister Bill, I got to tell you, I personally believe you're better than this. And do you intend to present a new real plan that actually addresses public safety, or do you intend to continue down the current path with these failed results?
Well, thank you, Glenn, and thank you personally for the vote of confidence that you offer to me. I will tell you that one of the challenges our government faced was trying to recover from the deficit reduction action plan of a previous government that actually cut $900 million, almost $500 million from the RCMP, nearly $400 million from CBSA, and cuts, frankly, to all of our national security agencies, through Correctional Services Canada, right across the board. Massive cuts. And it necessitated the elimination of police units and intelligence units that were doing really important work in this country. And when we came in, we began the long and sometimes challenging process of rebuilding that capacity, to getting the police services back up to the strength that they needed. I think the cuts that were made were frankly reckless and irresponsible, and they've had very long impacts. And for example, when you eliminate all of the integrated proceeds of crime units in the country, the expertise that those units represented, the police officers who had spent decades conducting economic crime investigations, we lost them.
I'm going.
Well, I had one more question, Chair.
I know you have tons of questions, Mr. Motz, but your time is way past. And this was a brief interlude of harmony, which apparently has dissipated quite rapidly. With that, Madame Kara, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Lucky, my next question is for you, and my question is the same question I asked you last time you were here, but we ran out of time to get an answer, so I'll try today. There have been many calls for the reconstructing of the RCMP to remove contract policing. We've heard this from numerous witnesses saying that RCMP is too big and has too many roles, which makes it difficult, if not impossible, to govern, and that the RCMP needs to get out of contract policing. We've certainly seen their shortcomings of this just recently in RCMP's failed approach to advance Indigenous reconciliation. In fact, we've seen quite the opposite. Can you perhaps comment on if you think the current RCMP contracting model is a good idea, considering your mandate to advance Indigenous reconciliation, or should it be removed?
I will go off the minister's previous comments in the sense that when properly funded, the model is very strong. It's flexible, it's nimble, and its ability to move resources when situations arise, like forest fires in Fort McMurray or terrorist investigation in Kingston. We can bring specialized resources in where we wouldn't have all of those in Kingston, bring them in, front end load an investigation, and work towards resolving those or solving those crimes. It gives us the flexibility to move the resources, but it needs to be properly funded. We are doing a review of policing, the contract itself, as well contract policing and how it works with federal policing to make sure that that model is sustainable and that model is serving the needs of Canadians and meeting the expectations of a safe Canada.
Thank you very much, Madame Guerra. Monsieur Simon, 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
Oui. 1 minute. Yes, a very amicable and a brief question to Mr. Blair. As I said, there will be an exploratory review on French in the House. And very often, I went to CBSA where it's very difficult to have a service in French. And thus, I wonder whether the minister has an action plan or some vision as to the improvement of the French services offered by CBSA.
I want to assure the member that we are absolutely committed to ensuring that our services at CBSA and in every part of our portfolio are offered in both official languages. And I would invite President Osowski to speak specifically to CBSA's effort in that regard.
15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just reiterate the minister's commitment and my own personal commitment to doing better in this regard. We get complaints on this from time to time, and we follow up and make sure that officers on the front line are fully aware of their obligations to provide services in both official languages.
Merci, Monsieur Simard. 1 minute, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. And the issue of being properly funded is important for the needs of Indigenous policing in Canada, which is long regarded as under-resourced and underfunded. Could you, Mr. Blair, point to anywhere in the main estimates that we've been given today, the $275 million that is supposed to be allocated for Indigenous policing? Does this appear in the main estimates that are before us?
Thank you very much, Jack. And I'm advised that through the main estimates, a total of $167.5 million in contribution funding is being sought for First Nations policing program for 2020-2021. And additionally, our government announced $88.6 million in contribution funding over 7 years for policing facilities in First Nation and Inuit communities under a separate but complementary program to First Nations policing. And finally, Jack, let me advise you that we're working very closely with the Assembly First Nations and with the National Chief, and we are providing additional resources to allow them to engage with us and to work comprehensively and effectively in the co-production of a new legislative framework for First Nations policing that will make it an essential service in this country. And I agree with you that the inevitable outcome of that new framework will be a recognition of additional funding that will be required, and we'll bring that forward after that work is near conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And with that, I think it brings to the conclusion the minister's appearance before the committee. Now, I need guidance from my colleagues as to whether we have officials continue until 5:30. I'm not quite sure in this kind of hybrid setting how you could indicate to the chair that you wish to continue. The alternative is to move to the votes, of which there are at least there are two minimum. The first on the main estimates and then on the supplemental estimates. I will need the clerk guidance as to whether we do a roll call vote or whether we do a indication vote. So first of all, is there an appetite to continue beyond the minister's presence here? Mr. Harris.
I'd just like to follow up on the last question that I had from someone from perhaps the RCMP or the departmental officials with respect to the $275 million that I talked about. This was supposed to be new money to deal with making Indigenous policing an essential service, and I don't see in the answer of the minister that there's actually that much new money, that there's existing funding that's available, unless someone can correct that.
If I'm giving Mr. Harris a question, I feel a lot to
Yeah.
the other part of these questions.
With all due respect to Mr. Harris, Chair, I think we would certainly, enjoy another question or two, like everybody else is, but we'd have to ask it in order, at least until it's time to do the vote.
The point of order, Mr. Chair. Perhaps we could just ask for a written response from someone to the committee at a later date.
Okay, that would solve that problem. Any other appetite to ask any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to call the question. And possibly because we are in this hybrid situation and I don't feel overly confident that I know how to do this. The first question, as I understand, is on the mains. It's votes 1, 5, and 10. But I'm going to look to the clerk to
point of order, Chair.
Yes, Mr.
I just as a point of order, last night we did with Foreign Affairs the same issue, of course, at the end of the meeting, and it was the question was put as to whether or not the committee was prepared to pass the estimates without a vote on division. And I think it was agreed by the committee that that was a proper way for them to proceed, and that's what was done. And I think the clerk there talked about that. Maybe the clerk can give advice on that as well.
That's what I was seeking, Mr. Harris, but I thank you for that guidance. Mr. Clerk.
It's however the committee wishes to proceed. They can group them, they can vote on division, they can look at them individually.
Well, we actually have to have two votes, though. One on the mains, one on the supplements, right?
That's correct. One
so
for
the
the
first
mains
question
and one
will
for
be on the mains.
supplemental
Okay.
estimates.
And on the mains, can we move forward on division? Is that appropriate?
Yes, on division, Mr. Chair, on our side.
On division.
Okay.
Yep.
We're agreeable to that?
Yep.
Is that sufficient for the formalities, Mr. Clerk, of reporting? Okay, then the second vote is on the supplements. Shall I ask whether that is to move on division? Is that correct? Is that fine?
Agreed.
Yep,
Correct?
on division.
Okay,
Agreed. On division.
Okay, and shall I report the will of the committee to the House?
Yep.
Yes.
I'll have Mr. Mott stand beside me while I do
Oh, thanks, Chair.
that. Okay, yeah. Okay, are we completed the formalities, Mr. Clerk, in order to be able to move forward?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Now, colleagues, just for points of information, number one, as you know, on Monday, there is going to be the fall economic statement that falls right into our time slot. And in informal conversations with you, we're proposing that we cancel our time that time. Is that acceptable to colleagues?
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
And the second thing is, again, we have Mr. Justice Pastarash coming to the committee on Wednesday, a week today. We're proposing that he have 2 hours. Is that agreeable to the committee?
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. That gives us guidance to go forward, and then we'll have to deal with the final week or two of sittings. So with that, we'll bring the meeting to adjournment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.